He was the untouchable campus king. Wealth, girls, cars. But when his empire collapsed and even his girlfriend traded up, he was left humiliated until a mysterious system appeared, offering him money to buy back power. The story kicked off with Shen Yuan cruising along like nothing in the world could touch him. Tires screeched across the asphalt when he slammed the brakes without warning. Around him, voices jumped up in a mess of noise, students pointing and whispering as the supercar jerked to a stop in the middle of campus. He stepped out, flashed a grin polished to perfection, and the crowd practically rippled. Someone nearby burst out that Shen Yuan, top-shelf second-gen rich kid, had rolled in with yet another flashy luxury car. From the vehicle, a pair of high heels touched the ground with deliberate ease. Zhou Wanting emerged, flaunting her standout figure and a smug look that made her arrival feel staged. The guys nearby could barely keep it together, muttering low about how he had just set foot on campus and already locked down one of the top picks from the second-year flight attendant class. So apparently, Shen Yuan had fortune baked into his DNA. A few more voices piled on, cheeks colored by envy, griping that being rich and good-looking basically gave him cheat codes, while someone else added that he didn't just get first dibs. He had a running monopoly, and word was some freshman goddesses were already circling. The pair headed toward the main building, leaving the ripple of gossip to trail uselessly behind them. Upstairs, one girl complained that Zhou Wanting wasn't even that much prettier, just faster on the draw, and tossed out the question of whether there was still a chance, while her friend cut in dryly that only the quick survived, warning her not to lose out to someone that shameless. Shen Yuan looked up at the crowd of whispering girls and delivered a smile tuned precisely to blind. Later, the two wandered through the mall like nothing else existed, completely locked in on each other. But that memory belonged to a chapter already shut, as Shen Yuan mulled over how that dreamlike third-year lifestyle had ended in complete ruin. His family's trio of tourism companies had tanked, dragging $100 million in debt down with them. In the now, he stepped into the dorm and tossed out a casual invite for a late-night gaming run with Lao Jiang, who only turned with a face full of frost, while another guy sprawled across his bunk reminded him that the era of finger-snapping privilege had ended and nobody was listening anymore. Shen Yuan stood rooted, ego bleeding out as he lingered on the rooftop with wind slapping across his skin and the silent realization sinking in that every last party buddy had ghosted him like he had never existed in the first place. No other road waited for him since his parents and little sister were packed into a rented apartment, and he, who once floated between luxury rentals, was now stuck in a plain dorm where even scraping by felt far-fetched. But the real hit hadn't landed yet. Zhou Wanting laid it down, her voice soaked in contempt, tossing him a final request to stop clinging and look for someone more patient. He froze in place, light gone from his face. 3 years wrapped up, cut down with a single sentence, and calling it cold didn't come close. Zhou Wanting held his gaze with the relaxed detachment of someone who had already checked out, her voice steeped in smooth, calculated courtesy. She turned toward the luxury car idling nearby and tossed a final line over her shoulder, dragging out the rustic nickname he used to favor with a flick of derision. She recommended they skip future run-ins altogether, but Shen Yuan stepped in front of her and called for her to stop. Startled, she twisted around, and he demanded every branded bag he had bought her, tossing out the logic that she had no use for them anymore and he might as well reclaim them. The jab hit raw, and she cracked, venting that 3 years had come down to a pile of scuffed handbags, and now he had the audacity to ask for those too. His expression sank into something darker as he told her to forget the money and tossed out the suggestion that they step back into that illusion one last time. Her face turned with visible disgust as she barked that he should vanish. From the car, an older voice drifted out, smooth and indulgent, responding without any real rush, coaxing her gently and asking where Shen Yuan planned to go, even offering him a lift. Shen Yuan glanced at the old man, the sarcasm curdling under his ribs at how tossing around nicknames for her suddenly didn't feel too rural for him, which landed more like a sick joke, so his voice iced over as he brushed it off, claiming home was just around the corner. The man wouldn't let up, tossing out concern about Shen Yuan's mental state, implying he might pull something reckless, even pushing again to take him home just to head off any trouble. The sting deepened with the realization that if this was how people treated him, and he kept swallowing it, he'd just be some joke with no punchline. So he dipped his head toward the window. All politeness and steady control labeled the man a decent person, gave the gesture its nod, but stood firm that he'd walk. He turned to her and added that she was a good girl, so he hoped the man could give her the care she deserved, and Joe Wanting stalled for a breath, not entirely sure what he meant. After she slid into the car, the man inside shot back a smug line, offhandedly claiming she was his now. That was when Shen Yuan moved, and coolly noted this was the moment a man should give the best to a woman, then rattled off a list of her favorites. Okamoto 001 as her brand, fishnets topping her drawer, the cheaper the better, with nurse and police uniforms taking the crown. The man's face twisted, drained to ash under the heat of fury, his reply stumbling into tangled messes. He rolled the window shut and sped off. Shen Yuan watched the car pull away into the stretch ahead, letting out a long breath as he muttered that he hadn't even started saying what he really meant to. There was a tired ring in his voice as he conceded that maybe Joe Wanting had chosen right after all. The sharp light above forced a squint, and he murmured that none of it touched him anymore, and he hoped her pick would give her the flawless life she was chasing. Then came the system, announcing that everyone should strive to live their perfect life. Perfect life system. Download was underway and the sun blinked out, replaced by an orange-gold panel suspended in midair, catching Shen Yuan frozen in quiet disbelief. Information cascaded across the screen, and Shen Yuan broke into a cold sweat, jabbing a finger at himself in total disbelief since he hadn't triggered anything and wasn't nearly desperate enough to consider it. The panel refreshed with a new list as the Perfect Life system completed its download, and a so-called perfect life wasn't just about cash. It demanded awareness of the opposite sex, so a mission booted up instructing him to spend money on a nearby opposite-sex individual of the same age whose favorability exceeded 60 and to secure their recognition. And the mission reward promised triple reimbursement for every expense, and if favorability increased by 3 points in the process, the refund would be doubled, though only cash or account transfers counted. He stayed locked on the screen, scratching his head over and over, refusing to buy what he was seeing. Then a soft voice called from behind him. Li Xiao stood there with quiet concern, pointing out that a boy ought to handle breakups without spiraling. She stepped closer, gaze steady but kind, offering the gentle reminder that breakups weren't the end, and better things waited around the corner. And Shen Yuan turned to her, blindsided. A pink number 65 floated just above her head, and he froze as everything snapped together. The number matched the system's requirement, which meant the panel, the download, and all of it wasn't a stress-induced illusion, and the favorability score lined up perfectly with the mission criteria. She stayed unaware, still offering warm encouragement and that familiar open smile. He gave a sheepish scratch to his scalp and managed a response, and he conveyed that he was fine, though underneath, he reeled from the creeping realization that a real cheat code had just landed in his lap. Li Xiao smiled back and brought up a past conversation, reminding him about the tuition support she'd mentioned earlier, and it had already been submitted since she genuinely wanted to help. Shen Yuan answered honestly that a few thousand yuan wouldn't even put a dent in his family's debt, and would be better spent on students with more pressing needs. And Li Xiao paused quietly before nodding, not pushing it. If anything ever weighed on him, academically or otherwise, she encouraged him to reach out. She turned away with a wave and took her leave. He kept watching her for a moment, before shifting focus back to the system panel. If that refund multiplier held true, this was the perfect moment to give it a trial run. He darted forward, caught up to Li Xiao, and reached for her hand. Wearing a grateful look, he thanked her and insisted on treating her to a cup of milk tea. Moments later, with milk tea in hand, he offered it to her. She accepted with lightly flushed cheeks and a soft thanks. He checked his phone right away, and a fresh bank alert popped up. After scanning the numbers, the new balance confirmed the double refund was completely real. As long as her favorability stayed above 60, he could keep spending and cashing in without end. Shen Yuan kept watching Li Xiao walk away and recognized that his family's financial pit might finally have a ladder in sight, and if he played this one right, they might even crawl back up to a level better than before. Shen Yuan wasn't looking to replay the past. He was aiming to outdistance it. But with only 99 yuan left in his pocket, he was nowhere near equipped, and his top priority had to be flipping that cash into more while identifying the right person to back. Shen Yuan leaned against a nearby wall, swiping through numbers on his phone. He was nothing more than a broke student from a financially wrecked family, and if Li Xiao was going to get anything decent, he needed a fix fast. An hour later, an ornate box rested completely inside a trash can on the side of the road. Shen Yuan glanced at the shopping bag in his hand, priced at 39,800, part of the current spring collection.
and honestly, it was a high-end knockoff slick enough to pass for something out of an S-class Urahara catalog. As he knocked on the door, he considered the risk that she might already have someone. Li Xiao opened the door and blinked in surprise when she saw him, unsure what had brought Shen Yuan to her place. He greeted her politely, apologized for the timing, and asked if she'd been cooking, while Li Xiao glanced at the bag, trying to figure out what he was after. Shen Yuan brushed off the formalities, handed her the bag, and explained with care that she had looked after him for all 3 years of college, and while it had always felt like something she chose to do, he only now grasped the warmth and weight behind that care. So this was a small thanks she needed to accept. Li Xiao studied the bag, instantly sensing it looked pricey, shrugged off the suspicion without hesitation, and explained that she was a teacher, so this had just been her job, and she treated every student the same, so there wasn't anything extra worth mentioning. Shen Yuan had seen that coming and clarified that it was a high-grade counterfeit that cost just 2 yuan, and she knew his situation, knew he couldn't burn money, but she had done more than enough for him, so if he couldn't show some kind of gratitude, what would that make him? And even if the bag meant little, it was a humble thank you she should take, if she didn't mind. Li Xiao looked at Shen Yuan, measured how much effort he'd poured into this, so turning him down would just come off as rude, and in moments like this, she couldn't afford to hurt his pride, so she took the bag and told him she'd hang on to it for now, promising to return the favor with a gift on his birthday or during a holiday. While they talked, a scent floated in from the kitchen. Li Xiao burst inside in a flurry, hollering that her fried meat was burning, diving toward the kitchen like she was saving the final pork belly left in Beijing. So Shen Yuan slipped off his shoes and stepped in while the coast was clear. Li Xiao popped her head out from the kitchen and called over that he hadn't eaten, so he should stay for dinner. Shen Yuan gave a grin, figuring that if her boyfriend wasn't an issue, then sticking around made sense, since proximity boosted favorability, and favorability stacked into system rewards. Right on cue, the system chimed, and his balance refreshed to 12,200. Shen Yuan glanced at his phone and smiled to himself as the transfer hit because the bag had cost 39,800, and the triple rebate scored him 11,400. So even after subtracting the cost, he was sitting on nearly 80,000 in pure gain. He'd spent 80,000 before, sure, but this was the first time he earned it, and he'd done it solo, and this was youth. This was victory. He stayed wrapped in his own thoughts long enough to miss that Li Xiao had finished cooking as she turned around to call him to eat, then called again, puzzled why he stood frozen, and he snapped back to the present and inquired where her boyfriend was, if it was only the two of them. Li Xiao turned away, untying her apron, replying with some confusion that she didn't have a boyfriend, muttering under her breath that the apron string refused to come loose. Shen Yuan leaned casually on the table and stepped in a bit closer to offer a hand. Li Xiao waved him off with a shy refusal, saying it wasn't necessary, but Shen Yuan moved faster, stepping behind her to untie the knot. Shen Yuan caught a glimpse of her back and murmured that it was fine and nearly done. Then came the sudden shout from Li Mang, loud and cutting, demanding to know what was going on. Shen Yuan jumped, scrambling to explain that it was nothing, and Li Xiao, completely unfazed, lit up with a smile and asked why she got home so late, before inviting her to dinner. Li Xiao darted over to hug Li Mang and introduced her as her younger sister. Shen Yuan forced a polite smile, lifted a hand, and gave a quiet greeting. Li Mang stared him down with a frosty glare and replied that she wasn't doing well. Sensing the mood crash, Shen Yuan quickly made up an excuse to leave, explaining that he'd already eaten before coming and needed to return to school. Li Xiao watched him go with a puzzled look, thinking he clearly meant to eat just moments earlier. Li Mang crossed her arms as she tracked his exit and muttered with clear disgust that she believed he had bad intentions, but the ever-trusting Li Xiao shut that down instantly, insisting he was just her student. That only made Li Mang angrier, barking that it was absurd, a student wanting to hug his teacher, and Li Xiao flushed bright red, shoved her sister toward the dining table, and urged her repeatedly to stop spouting nonsense and start eating. Shen Yuan, meanwhile, walked along the road and mapped out his next move, weighing whether to spend more effort on Li Xiao, who was only his teacher, or reconsider Zhou Wanting, who, while greedy, at least made her motives obvious. A man crashed into him head-on without any warning. He quickly identified the person in front of him and recognized Huang Haibao, his roommate. His outstretched hand gave away his distress. Huang Haibao revealed that Fang Minhui, his so-called goddess, had gone to the movies with Li Jianping. The mention of Fang Minhui stirred a memory in Shen Yuan, since she was the campus belle of the 2020 International Business Class and Huang Haibao's unreachable crush. as they had never shared even a single moment together, not even a greeting. And realizing this, he went silent and responded with dry disbelief. Huang Haibao noticed the lack of interest in his expression and pushed back in confusion, suspecting he was being mocked. And Shen Yuan tilted his head and indicated with a glance, and he told him to look forward. Huang Haibao's eyes lit up. Two curvy girls were walking ahead. Blood rushed back into his face as he leaned closer to Shen Yuan with revived hope, trying to convince himself there was still a chance since no hotel had been involved. Watching this pitiful optimism, Shen Yuan regarded the self-degradation with faint contempt, questioning how someone could expect sweet fruit while crawling through thorns. Then he saw her. The number 72 hovered above her head, forcing a sharp intake of breath, since that number was higher than Li Xiao's.
The girl flicked a look at Shen Yuan and brought up the rumor floating around about his breakup, and Fang Minhui blinked at the news. Her friend rolled her eyes and dismissed him with a scoff that dripped condescension, but Fang Minhui didn't fully register the shade and tossed another glance his way while strolling past. She recalled her own cheers during military training and remembered handing him a bottle of water. He used to be the standard issue spoiled heir, and once the money dipped, so did the appeal. And it was honestly a relief they'd never dated, or she'd have thrown away 3 years of her life. And Fang Minhui let out a quiet sigh. Over on the sidelines, Shen Yuan kept his eyes on her, while the fluctuating number floating above her head locked in his focus, and he recognized that affection ratings could carry real value, but hers was crashing hard. That shook him, and he came clean with himself that dragging his feet wasn't an option. And after weighing his roommate's potential grudge, he looked over at Huang Haibao and floated the question whether chasing Fang Minhui would lead to fallout. Huang Haibao rubbed his chin, scanned him with care, and pushed back with a challenge whether Shen Yuan had any game left, now that the BMW and the trust fund shine had worn off. But in the end, he laid it out that if Li Jianping wasn't in the mix, then he had no reason to care, and that sealed it. Shen Yuan pivoted and replied with locked-in certainty and made it clear he was going all in, and Huang Haibao shouted after him, stunned. Shen Yuan broke into a sprint toward Fang Minhui and approached her head-on, and she turned, pink-cheeked and puzzled. Her friend shifted stance on instinct, stepping forward with a flash of guarded suspicion. Shen Yuan held steady and offered up a sincere invite, complete with a reservation at Star Sushi Kaiki, and asked whether she'd come. Fang Minhui's blush deepened, thrown by the offer, but her friend fired back with a smirk, doubting he could swing a spot charging over 1,000 yuan ahead. Shen Yuan tuned her out completely while scratching his head and flashed the sharpest grin in his arsenal, and added a stroll into the mix and asked whether she'd help pick out a birthday present for his sister and told her to give him an answer before noon. He walked off, waving without looking back while Huang Haibao froze, stuck watching the whole display in stunned silence. Fang Minhui turned to her friend, face still pink, and murmured whether it was okay to go out with him since it had only been a movie with Li Jianping. And her friend, unfazed, reminded her it was a top-tier Japanese restaurant. She laid out the options with blunt practicality that Shen Yuan had attitude, but looked better than Li Jianping, and if his family bounced back, he would leave him in the dust. She grabbed Fang Minhui's phone and made the call herself that dinner, and a walk weren't exactly binding as she grinned and offered to reply on her behalf, so Fang Minhui stammered in agreement. The following evening, Fang Minhui and Shen Yuan headed out together, strolling toward the reserved restaurant. They sat down at the table, and the server brought the dishes quickly and introduced them with exaggerated enthusiasm. Fang Minhui smiled and took the seat beside him, noting she had heard his family was struggling and that he shouldn't have splurged on this meal. Shen Yuan turned to reply that was fine. The Japanese food here hit a different level. Mid-sentence, he froze, jolted by contact with Fang Minhui's curvaceous figure, and his face flushed as he cursed silently that her posture was dangerous. He reminded himself that it had only been 2 months since he quit gambling, and he needed to stay calm. Fang Minhui then raised the question of why he invited her out, and was it really just to help pick a gift for his sister? So Shen Yuan, sipping his tea to steady himself, responded earnestly that he had always wanted to invite her, but never caught the right moment. Suddenly, the number floating above Fang Minhui's head dropped to 66 as she lowered her gaze, her expression unreadable, and replied with a flat sound. Shen Yuan tensed as the dip in affection confused him, and he suspected she wasn't thrilled with his answer as another point ticked off the counter. He pulled himself together quickly, cleared his throat, and veered the topic toward a shared memory that during military training she used to bring him water and message him at night, and he hadn't let any of it fade. Suddenly, the affection level spiked to 67 as she flushed and brought up whether he still remembered. Shen Yuan rubbed his head and responded plainly that forgetting had never been an option. The number floating over Fang Minhui's head climbed to 69, then edged up to 70, and Shen Yuan, however, kept grappling with the demon inside that urged him to stay composed. Time passed, and 40 minutes later, they wrapped up their meal and headed toward the cashier, and the staff welcomed them with rehearsed cheer, while the total came out to 2,920 yuan. But with his membership, the reduced price was 2,774, so Shen Yuan gave a small nod and responded with courtesy. The affection level bumped again to 73, as Fang Minhui glanced over at Shen Yuan and considered that her monthly living cost barely touched 3,000 yuan, but this single meal had nearly wiped it out. And she remembered Li Jianping's casual pitch to grab food at the school cafeteria before catching a movie, loosely planning to dine out some other time, and he had cash but never used it. Right after the register beeped, a system notification popped up. A limited time task had triggered to spend money on a nearby opposite gender person whose affection level topped 60 and gained their respect, and the reward offered triple reimbursement of the amount. And if the affection rose by 3 points during the process, the payout would multiply again. Only then did Shen Yuan glance at the number now glowing over Fang Minhui's head, and it showed 76. But it had read 72 when they first met, so that explained the mechanic. Fang Minhui turned towards Shen Yuan, cheeks faintly tinged, and a soft smile surfaced as she found him increasingly attractive. And maybe this was the allure that came with money. With that passing thought, she clasped his hand and moved forward, mentioning they should get going, as Shen Yuan still had to pick out a gift for his sister at Guojin. Moments later, at the Guojin shopping center, an old man spotted Shen Yuan and muttered sourly to Zhou Wanting, and she responded with shock. She stared at him with clear disapproval, as he had ended things with her just yesterday. But now he was already out shopping with another girl, while the old man scoffed inwardly as a penniless student dared to splurge in a place like this. He cursed under his breath that he, the old fool, had wrecked his back throwing money at handbags for Zhou Wanting in some pathetic campaign to impress her, while this brat ran around neck-deep in debt with girls still lining up. Shen Yuan caught sight of them and mentioned heading to another store, and Fang Minhui gave an immediate nod. The old man, unwilling to eat the slight, stepped forward to block Shen Yuan's way and pointed out that they were already here, so why not look around since window shopping didn't charge a fee. Zhou Wanting demanded to know what Shen Yuan was doing here, and who the girl beside him was. Shen Yuan answered with a chill shrug that it was coincidence since he was just picking out a gift for his sister. The old man snorted that if it was really a gift, he might want to check out the toy wholesale market instead, since was there anything here he could actually afford? Zhou Wanting followed up, striding right up to Fang Minhui. Her grin came polished and sharp, dressed up as some casual tip that the kind of person she was with couldn't be relied on. Shen Yuan refused to let that slide, and instantly stepped in front of Fang Minhui, tossing back what business it was of hers, what she meant by deceived, and who exactly she thought he was deceiving. The old man added his 2 cents, remarking that Shen Yuan shouldn't talk that way to Zhou Wanting, reminding him that a man ought to mind his manners. And besides, she used to be his girlfriend and knew his family's situation like the back of her hand, so cut the act because no one was entertained. Shen Yuan, completely fed up, noted inwardly how disgusting the pair came off and how they genuinely deserved each other. Right then, the system chimed in again that a perfect life shouldn't be underestimated, rolling out a new time-limited task. Spend money on someone of the opposite gender with favorability above 60 while triggering negative emotions in surrounding individuals. And the reward was that if the person beside the host racked up negative emotional value because of the host would get a double refund for every 5-point rise, calculated from the amount spent on the opposite gender target, and this would stack with all current refund bonuses from spending. Shen Yuan picked up on the cue and offered a faint smile, originally planning to spare them some pride and avoid turning things ugly. But since they kept prodding and the system had thrown in a task, he no longer saw any point in restraint. Shen Yuan lightly took Fang Minhui's hand, kept his poise, and moved ahead, guiding her into a luxury boutique. The 2 receptionists, fresh off their gossip session, started tossing blame back and forth as one pointed out that Shen Yuan came by often and told the other to handle him. But the second snapped back, reminding her that she'd been the one humiliated over fussing about a counterfeit bag, while the first only tried one on and never paid, so it was her problem this time. The first receptionist's face stiffened, as she shot over a cold stare and ordered her to do it. Over by another display, Zhou Wanting took a quick look around, picked up a bag, and held it toward the old man next to her, checking if he'd cover it. The receptionist lit up and told her to hold on, while another watched with envy and griped internally that high-value, dependable clients always went to someone else, leaving her stuck with moochers. She strolled over to Zhou Wanting with a sugary smile, started laying it on thick, praising her taste and claiming the bag really suited her. Not like those clueless customers with no style, while another receptionist brought out a jewelry set, pitching it as a perfect match for the bag and asking if she'd like to try it. She mentioned the full set would run around 100,000 yuan. Shen Yuan ignored the pair of suck-ups and looked at Fang Minhui, murmuring that she didn't need to be stingy for his sake, and after hearing that, she pointed at a nearby bag, saying it looked nice, with a fresh design her sister might appreciate. The receptionist scoffed at the mention, stating that the bag and another item together would hit over 50,000 yuan, and came at a steep price. The old man's expression soured, annoyed that she now angled for a combo worth 100,000 yuan when he'd only planned on smoothing things over with a 2,000 yuan option. Once Zhou Wanting nailed the sale, she leaned in close and nudged him to swipe his card, coaxing him to flex some boyfriend strength while Shen Yuan was nearby. But the old man tasted only bitterness, figuring that if 100,000 counted as boyfriend strength, his account didn't even qualify. Suddenly, Shen Yuan's voice cut through, claiming both bags, along with the accessories the other girl had just listed. The sugar couple froze, stunned, stiff. Fang Minhui stood there, just as lost. The sales associate who had latched onto Zhou Wanting earlier flipped her stance in a heartbeat, her assumptions collapsing since she had pegged him as broke. Now, with both bags and all the extras in the mix, her mood flipped, and she nearly skipped off to total the haul, which came to 131,000 yuan. And Shen Yuan, clearly finding the whole scene a good time, treated it like snacks, laughs, and now cash back. He pulled out a plain card, handed it over, and told her to charge it. The overjoyed sales associate lit up and rushed to pack everything, nearly tearing up since she'd written off the day as a bust, and suddenly, this dumped guy was blowing past his former spending habits. Zhou Wanting burned with jealousy and snapped, demanding to know how Shen Yuan had cash when his family had supposedly gone bankrupt. And the old man next to her piped in, tossing out a theory about him taking a loan. Shen Yuan tilted his chin and threw back a calm response that it didn't matter whether they believed him, since he wasn't broke. And he even offered to grab Zhou Wanting another bag just over 20,000 yuan, brushing it off like spare change. The old man looked ready to pop, but Shen Yuan kept going, tossing in that a man should carry both generosity and flair, and that Audi A8 of his had to clock in at least 600,000 or 700,000 yuan, so a small sum like this shouldn't shake him. Zhou Wanting couldn't handle it anymore and shoved the man to respond, refusing to let him lose face. But inside, he boiled, since that A8 was on a payment plan and she couldn't find that out, and the pressure nearly snapped him. Desperate to escape, he grabbed his phone and claimed he had to take a call, but Zhou Wanting shouted after him, furious, while the other receptionist soaked in the drama. The old man burst outside, faking a loud phone call while practically sprinting away, barking into the receiver about project approvals. And Zhou Wanting clenched her jaw, rage bubbling as she silently vowed that Shen Yuan would pay for this. Watching their retreating backs and the rising number on the gold digger's meter, he figured negative emotions stacked up faster than expected and easier than predicted, but not worth the hassle. So all that remained was wrapping up the mission. After paying, Shen Yuan handed the bag to Fang Minhui and tossed out that it was a gift, so she pulled away, flustered, waving her hands in protest since it felt like too much. He shoved the bag into her hands anyway, and with his other hand he took another bag from the sales associate, brushing it off as nothing, just a bag. Since the mockery she caught from those two traced back to him and left him ashamed, so this counted as making up for it, and he nudged her to accept. So Fang Minhui stalled, then gave a hesitant thanks. Shen Yuan lit up and threw out that she shouldn't rush to thank him just yet, since there was more, all of it hers. So Fang Minhui blinked at him, blurting out if maybe one of them was for his younger sister. Shen Yuan brushed it off with a shrug, since he didn't know if his sister liked these, but he knew she liked the bag, and that checked all the boxes. On the surface, he kept things breezy, but inside, he cursed, since buying anything for that little devil would get him chewed out for wasting cash and tattled onto their parents, especially when both bags had always been meant for Fang Minhui. So he silently willed her to just take them already, and once she did, he could kick off the refund tonight. Fang Minhui inched back, uneasy since one bag already pushed it, and taking everything felt off, maybe even gave the wrong vibe. Her face flushed pink with discomfort, and she mumbled that she couldn't take it. Before she got the words out, he already took her hand. Grinning, he brushed it off as just the beginning, since there was still time, nudging her again to accept, and if she didn't, he'd feel wounded. And that quiet persistence got her to grab the last bag. A system notification pinged right after, and congratulations rolled in as the mission cleared with 15 negative points racked up, a triple refund on all costs, a bonus for gifting the opposite sex, triggering a 6-fold refund, and his bank card lit up with a deposit, bumping his balance to 786,356 yuan. Shen Yuan kept hold of Fang Minhui's hand and tagged her mentally as his personal ATM, which meant sticking close and keeping her affection bar from tanking again. He nudged her about heading back to school since it was getting late, mulling over whether to lean in a little more with her, but pushing it wouldn't help, so slow and steady seemed smarter. Fang Minhui, caught off guard in a good way, weighed how different Shen Yuan felt compared to Li Jianping, who probably would have pitched a bar night by now, and honestly, she might have caved. Not long after, Shen Yuan reached the south dorms just as a pack of boys tumbled down the stairs, rowdy and hyped, throwing congratulations at Li Jianping for snagging the class beauty, while everyone else was still flying solo. A celebration definitely felt earned, and Li Jianping picked that exact moment to spot Shen Yuan, then cranked his voice higher, tossing out an open invite for the entire class and making sure no one got left out, since it had to feel big. Shen Yuan clocked the jab, paused, then headed back into his dorm. Inside, one roommate looked sour, flipped open his receiver and filled in the rest, griping that Li Jianping had barely finished a movie with the class beauty before making sure half the campus knew. And clearly, the real target was room 503. Shen Yuan already figured as much and gave a dry smile, nudging some calm into the air since Li Jianping wouldn't stay smug for long. Fang Minhui wasn't sticking around. The other roommate spun towards Shen Yuan and cut in with a sharp jab that Fang Minhui had gone to the movie with Li Jianping last night, and who even knew what else went down. Also, she hadn't accepted Shen Yuan's invite earlier, which kind of spelled everything out, but Shen Yuan dropped onto his bed, let it play out, and kept quiet. He flicked his phone on, glanced at his account, and figured the new payout had already landed, so a quick trip home tomorrow sounded about right. At Shen Yuan's place, Shen Yaode, his uncle, lounged in a chair and gave him a nod when he walked in. Shen Yuan stepped inside and tossed back a cold greeting, and his father dropped his voice, waving him off to his room since he and his uncle were mid-conversation. After Shen Yuan went to his room, his father's voice still filtered through, explaining he understood his brother's circumstances but urged patience since he was close to settling the debt and would handle part of it first. But Shen Yaode brushed that off with a smug tone, tossing out that partial payment wasn't enough since he'd been grinding non-stop and wanted the entire sum now. Shen Yuan's mother couldn't hold it anymore and burst out that Shen Yaode had once borrowed 300,000 when he couldn't even afford a car wash and no one chased him down. Yet, now that they'd only taken 200,000, he'd already shown up 3 or 4 times. So she demanded to know what his game was. Shen Yuan's father stepped in and tried to ease her off, tossing in that his brother had his own load to carry. But she shot right past him, since regardless of his problems, he knew what was real, especially after she had already checked with his wife. And he hadn't been grinding at all lately. Still flaunting that smug face, he tossed out lines about how debts were sacred, and since they were family, this was already him showing mercy, because if it had been someone else, they'd already have seen what actual debt recovery looked like. She flared up again, snapping that it was laughable he even dared to bring up violence. So in the end, the whole Shen family had shown their true teeth, and treating them kindly had been a waste from the beginning. Shen Yuan's father tried smoothing things over again, tossing out whether they still had some jewelry left, and told her to grab something to sell, promising they'd buy it back later. But Shen Yuan's mother fired back with a sharp tone that they should drop that idea, forget about buying anything back, and focus on clearing the debt that was strangling the house. Inside his room right then, Shen Yuan's system pinged with a notice claiming a perfect life couldn't carry debt, so a time-limited mission popped up to eliminate either family or personal debt, and the reward promised to double whatever amount he cleared. So if he paid 200,000 now, he'd earn 1 million marked for a car, and Shen Yuan locked his gaze on the screen, stunned by the timing, since the mission had landed at the exact right moment. His eyes lit up, since even before the alert, he had already decided to lift some of the weight off his old man that day. Close by, his mother opened a box no larger than a jewelry case, filled with everything old Shen had ever handed her. And even during the roughest stretches, she had never been able to part with any of it. And though the pieces were worth several tens of thousands, he could take them first. It looked like 2 gold rings had gone missing during the last move, and when his mother sighed over it, Shen Yuan flushed deep inside with guilt, remembering how he had snuck them out to buy a bag for Zhou Wanting, because back then, he really had been an unfilial son. Shen Yuan acknowledged it grimly, then shoved the door open and announced without hesitation that he had money. His father glanced over and reminded him in a flat tone that now wasn't the time for jokes, while his mother, worn out, remarked that with the household like this, he probably still needed that money for his cafeteria card, so he shouldn't mess around. Shen Yuan scratched his head, slightly sheepish, and mentioned to his father that he really did have money as the familiar sound of a transfer followed. His parents both checked their phones and reacted to the 200,000 figure with matching shock, and his father stared hard, demanding to know where that kind of money had come from. Shen Yuan offered a fabrication about remembering the large sum of pocket money they had given him earlier, saying he'd invested a chunk in crypto with a friend who refused to let him withdraw, promising it would grow, and only recently had it finally been converted to cash, and he figured the excuse held up, since that pocket money had been pretty hefty back then. His mother perked up instantly, remarking that he'd helped the family out of a bind, while his father reminded her they needed to hurry and use the money to send that pest away. Right after, his father left to transfer the funds to Shen Yaode and noted coldly that the debt had been cleared, while his mother added a curse and told him to get lost and not show his face again. Shen Yaode checked the balance on his phone and instantly caved as he stammered, glancing towards Shen Yuan's mother while trying to keep things polite. She cut him off hard and raised her voice, asking if he couldn't understand human language since she'd told him to get lost. He didn't get the chance to walk out on his own since Shen Yuan's parents tossed him out directly. He stood outside, dazed, replaying everything in his head, confused since his cousins still owed nearly 100 million elsewhere, and he had figured the money would dry up fast, which was why he'd shown up early to collect. So how had they pulled this off so easily, and could that cousin's new business actually be turning in a profit, and was he about to strike gold again? A wave of regret crashed through, and he smacked himself because after today's mess, there was no way they'd manage to face each other again, and he slammed himself internally since he never should have crossed over to this side. Meanwhile, Shen Yuan's system pinged with an alert confirming that the host had hit the first debt repayment milestone, and the reward would be issued right away, so the construction bank card received 400,000 and then another 1 million yuan, bringing the current balance to 2,186,356 yuan. Shen Yuan glanced at his phone and crunched the numbers quietly, figuring that even after setting aside the car funds mentioned in the second transfer, his personal account now sat above 1 million. So he hadn't counted on coming home solving not just a family burden, but also dropping a windfall in his lap. Shen Yuan paused for a breath, but wiping out the household's debts would still chew through much more, since even if he dumped the full million on his father, it wouldn't cover everything, so a smarter play would be flipping the capital for more. His parents wept with joy beside him, while Shen Yuan watched them, tallying figures silently, and figured he could only spare another 200,000 for his father. With that done, he stepped over and mentioned that he still had another segment untouched, around 200,000, and asked if it needed to be used right away. Shen Yuan's mother waved the idea off and said they could wait on it, noting that the other debts weren't pressing, but old Shen flushed and cut in. He requested 50,000 immediately. Shen Yuan grinned in reply, remarking that it felt about right. A memory crept in, unpleasantly familiar, as he remembered the same desperate look from himself when begging for cash, so inheritance clearly looped back around. Later, outside Li Xiao's house, Shen Yuan stood waiting. He spotted her and gave a nod, while Li Xiao smiled when she noticed him, and mentioned that there were no classes that afternoon. Shen Yuan leaned in and checked if she was free that night, adding that he wanted to treat her to dinner since she'd grabbed food for him before. The second those words landed, a pair of sharp eyes slid into view behind her, and Li Xiao instantly broke into a cold sweat. Li Mang had shown up, her whole face carrying the vibe of a boss fight loading screen. Shen Yuan halted mid-greeting, fumbled her name, and felt warning bells slam through his skull while mentally filing this teacher's sister under natural disaster category. These two weren't even in the same show. Under her stare, Shen Yuan scrambled, spun on his heel, dropped some garbled excuse about school, mumbled a rain check for dinner, and bolted like an underleveled side character spotted by a roaming raid boss. Li Meng threw a sharp look at Li Xiao, reminding her she'd already flagged the kid as shady. But Li Xiao replied calmly that maybe he just meant to treat them to dinner, and, even if not, she wouldn't go along with anything else anyway. Shen Yuan was long gone, and as he walked, the heat settled around him like it meant to pick a fight. His mind drifted to cooler times, coasting around in Zhou Wanting's air-conditioned car, that comfort sticking with him, weirdly vivid and more nostalgic than it had any right to be. Still soaking in the memory, he paused, pulled out his phone, remembered the untouched car fund, and started wondering if leaving it idle counted as disrespecting the allocation system. After hovering on the edge, he pinged Fang Minhui to ask if she was free that afternoon to check out cars, and she fired back almost immediately saying she had no classes. On her end, her friend, already locked into rom-com wingwoman mode, peeked at the screen, squealed like she'd just caught the twist, and poked fun about car shopping dates, pushing further by asking if she even planned to come back to the dorm that night. Fang Minhui flushed hard and pushed back, swearing nothing was going on between them. Her friend only got louder, smug about her claim that Fang Minhui had scored herself a handsome, well-off turtle, and that Shen Yuan was basically cruising through life on story mode. She lunged over and gave Fang Minhui's balloons a cheeky poke, triggering a shocked, red-faced squawk. An hour later, they walked into a sleek 4S dealership, and one of the staff noticed and came over with the usual welcome, before suddenly turning beet red, locking eyes with Fang Minhui and blurting out her name, completely thrown by seeing her there. Fang Minhui turned with measured ease and addressed him as Senior Qin, recognizing him immediately as Qin Yang, the upperclassman who used to chase her around in high school, which left her confused about running into him here. Qin Yang stepped in and glanced at Shen Yuan, throwing out a question about who he was. Shen Yuan moved forward and presented himself as her classmate. Qin Yang followed up by checking if they were browsing and which model they liked, so Shen Yuan pointed to the car beside him and expressed interest in finding out more. Qin Yang responded with visible excitement, motioned toward the display area, and encouraged them to look around, even mentioning they could sit inside, but mentally he dismissed it, since the base model started at 500,000 and hit over 600,000 with extras. And the kid looked like background noise from a low-budget slice of life, and broke kids didn't close deals. So showing off in a luxury showroom only meant one thing. Then he locked eyes on Fang Minhui and confirmed again that she was still gorgeous, every bit worthy of the pedestal he'd once built for her. He reminded himself that times had shifted, and he now pulled over 10,000 a month, stood near the top of the sales leaderboard, and drove a 200,000 Honda Accord to work, which girls actually paid attention to now, so guys like him had climbed to the top of the dating pool while he stood there, letting half-baked dreams mess with his head. Then he casually walked up beside her and greeted her, mentioning that it had been a while and tossing out whether she had time that night to catch up. But Fang Minhui answered with a bit of discomfort, explaining she already had plans and probably couldn't make it. Shen Yuan suddenly interjected and inquired if a test drive could be arranged. The interruption grated on him, twisting his mood as Qin Yang stiffened at the interference while trying to reconnect with Fang Minhui and questioned what the kid even thought he was doing. So he tossed him aside mentally again, certain he couldn't buy anything, and considered the request a waste of time. Covering up the annoyance, he explained that the test drive car had already been taken by the boss, so none were currently available. With a habit of flipping cars every few days, Shen Yuan didn't walk in here wearing rose-colored glasses since he'd spotted the M9 the moment he walked through the door, so if nothing could be set up, he wanted someone else. Without adding extra explanation, he stepped out of the vehicle and loudly asked the front desk if another salesperson was available, making it clear he wanted to test drive right away. A woman emerged and softly introduced herself as Chen Na, the store's sales consultant, and asked how she could assist. Shen Yuan glanced at the calm girl now standing in front of him and blinked in mild surprise at her appearance. Another colleague nearby observed the exchange and wondered why Qin Yang had let the customer walk, especially now that Chen Na had stepped in. So Qin Yang brushed it off with a sour remark, claiming he didn't care, and that Chen Na was only playing around, pretending a student interested in an M9 and requesting a test drive meant anything to him. The colleague warned he could end up eating those words if the guy actually went through with it. But Qin Yang rolled his eyes at the idea, convinced the customer had zero follow-through, just another broke guy staging a date in a showroom, a performance he'd already seen play out more times than he could count. Meanwhile, Chen Na carried on with the introduction, pointing out the vehicle's smart driver seat setup and 192-line LiDAR system. which supported full autonomous driving, then circled back to get his thoughts. Shen Yuan silently gauged her polish and decided she ran the floor with clean precision, and in terms of looks and form, she matched Fang Minhui without falling short. But he also recalled reading that female sales consultants rarely close deals with male buyers, and a few untidy assumptions about Chen Na drifted up. Nearby, Chen Na checked whether he grasped the specs, then moved to ask about his budget, so Shen Yuan smoothly inquired if the car was available, and mentioned that he planned to drive it home today. Chen Na's face lit up as she quietly pieced things together, since most buyers circled a model several times before deciding. But this guy had barely skimmed the details before jumping in, which only raised more questions about why Qin Yang had written him off. She confirmed inventory, and with a bit of reluctance let him know the car wasn't in stock, but another store had a canceled order due to financing, so if needed, she could ship that one over within a week. And Shen Yuan gave a nod, fine with the plan, agreeing to place the order that same day. Chen Na blinked with a spark of surprise, giving Shen Yuan a glance that now held a trace of awe, as she privately wondered if he was some unicorn buyer or had another plan entirely. But regardless, she stayed even-toned and courteously invited him inside to rest, mentioning the 50,000 yuan deposit and that she would go retrieve the contract. Back in the store, Qin Yang wasted no breath, spinning gossip, pressing Chen Na about how it ended. Chen Na sat down at the desk, steadily preparing the contract, and coolly confirmed that the customer had gone through with it, and the colleague who caught that burst out in shock that he'd actually bought it, and that it happened fast. Qin Yang grew more incredulous, planted his hands on his hips, and sneered that the guy was clearly faking it. And when it came time to pay, he'd pull out every excuse in the book to vanish, adding that they saw customers like that all the time in the store. While the male colleague lit up with realization and chimed in that he'd been in car sales for years and never witnessed anyone purchase so fast, Chen Na stayed calm and reaffirmed that Shen Yuan had bought it, even going so far as to pay in full. And this left the male colleague so stunned that his words came out in a mess. The colleague turned toward Qin Yang and snapped that he'd just let a huge deal slip through his fingers and would definitely regret it. But there wasn't anything he could do with his frustration except clench his fists in bitter resentment. Once the paperwork wrapped up, Chen Na smiled and offered that if Shen Yuan ran into any trouble with the follow-up steps, he could come to her any time, and she asked where he planned to go next and whether she should see him off. Fang Minhui came over and took Shen Yuan's arm, declining with a nod that there was no need and that they'd call a ride themselves. Chen Na, catching her attitude, grew a little awkward and regretted that she'd been too eager trying to help the customer, only to upset his girlfriend instead, quietly cursed herself, and stayed where she was with a polite nod that she wouldn't be seeing them off further. They strolled down the street and Shen Yuan glanced at his phone, casually tossing out whether they should grab food now while she suddenly pouted and let out a groan that clearly didn't bode well. Shen Yuan immediately caught the change and turned toward her, checking if Fang Minhui was upset and whether she'd gotten jealous, and she flushed and turned away, denying it with a mutter. Shen Yuan grinned indulgently and reminded her that even if she refused, her face said everything. And besides, he and Chen Na were just tied through a customer-salesperson relationship, nothing more. Fang Minhui flushed deeper, her tone turning sulky as she retorted with a huff that who could tell, and he sure looked like he was enjoying the chat and even lingered on her moments forever. Shen Yuan scratched his cheek, embarrassed, and explained that it was just something he did by habit, and that every time he added someone as a friend, he always scrolled through their feed, while she turned her face aside and warned him not to keep doing that. After speaking, Fang Minhui quietly puzzled over why she'd suddenly gotten jealous, even though there wasn't anything going on with him. And she noted to herself that guys who dropped money easily really drew women in, so she told herself she had to hold on to Shen Yuan tightly. Meanwhile, Shen Yuan kept repeating that he wouldn't do that again, and threw in that they should eat first, then go shopping, and he'd buy her gifts for National Day. Though deep down he felt a little jittery, assuring himself that he wouldn't let anything sketchy happen next time, and mumbled under his breath that he wasn't exactly some innocent saint. Hearing the word shopping, Fang Minhui reminded him that he'd already bought her 2 bags yesterday, and she admitted to herself that while she was kind of looking forward to it, she didn't want Shen Yuan spending like that, and worried he might start thinking she was using him. Shen Yuan smiled gently and reasoned that it was all fine, since girls naturally had tons of bags, and anyway, with 7 days in a week, she wouldn't even need to repeat any. He figured that buying things for girls netted him a 3, and the more she picked, the better it was. since that meant he'd be earning more. Later on, they walked into a cafe and Shen Yuan handed her the menu and asked whether she wanted a cold drink or a hot one today. And hearing that, Fang Minhui bashfully guessed that he might be hinting at whether she had her period or not. She answered timidly that it was cold. Shen Yuan got confused but caught on eventually, turned red, and muttered to himself over what kind of expression she was pulling, told himself to keep it together, and wondered where his mind had wandered. Then calculated that his last time with Zhou wanting was already 2 months ago, and things had been building up, so he decided it was time to let the misunderstanding ride a little longer. 3 hours later, the two left the shopping mall, and she had on a watch worth 12,800, a bracelet worth 20,800, and a handbag worth 50,500, and her favorability score had climbed to 81. Fang Minhui looked at him shyly, amazed that he treated her this well to the point that it didn't feel real, and noted to herself that he'd just dropped over 80,000 yuan in such a short time and totaled nearly 140,000 across 2 days. Over on this side, Shen Yuan's bank system lit up with a notification showing a transfer of 252,000, noting that his current balance now sat at 2,254,256, and he stared at the swelling digits on his phone with satisfaction, impressed that the system's double cashback actually delivered, and amused that after handing old Shen 50,000 for the car, it bounced back instantly. And after mentally subtracting the car cost, he still had more than 1.6 million yuan sitting there waiting to be burned. Shen Yuan turned to Fang Minhui with a sly grin and threw out the idea that she shouldn't head back to the dorm tonight. Hearing the suggestion, she gave a shy nod. Half an hour later, over at the Grand Rich Hotel in room 808, Shen Yuan took a leisurely warm shower, letting the water carry away everything unpleasant. Fang Minhui stayed curled up on the bed outside, nervously watching her phone screen, feeling troubled that Chen Ling had messaged about why she hadn't returned and panicked over what excuse to use and briefly considered saying she was with Shen Yuan before cringing at the thought of spelling it out. Before she landed on a plan, Shen Yuan stepped out, body dripping and defined, drying his hair while checking whether she was set. She flushed at the sight, meeting his gaze, and inside apologized to Chen Ling, rationalizing that Shen Yuan had already given her so much. Eventually, she fired off a rushed text, saying she wouldn't return tonight and to tell anyone who asked that she'd gone to visit family. She agreed again, flustered, but admitted she hadn't showered yet, though that didn't stop him from burying his head into the curve of her shoulder, breathing her in, muttering that it was fine and that her scent was addictive. He pinned her down swiftly and got busy, and she burned red, soft noises escaping her lips against her will. She murmured his name as Shen Yuan pulled the zipper of her dress with his teeth, muttering something low about loving every trace of her scent. Fang Minhui stared up in a daze, one hand resting on his chest, gently urging him to take it easy. He grinned and obliged, and the two folded into each other, wrapped up in it, forgetting everything else. Half an hour later, they sprawled together, and Fang Minhui rested in Shen Yuan's arms, concluding that the experience wasn't nearly as terrifying as Chen Ling had made it sound. Shen Yuan, in contrast, looked a bit sour, mulling over the surprise that Fang Minhui had gone that far, thinking it felt incredible, but also wiped him out and figuring 2 months off had clearly ruined his stamina. Before he had the chance to fully relax, Fang Minhui climbed over him and gently pushed the idea of going again. Shen Yuan froze at the suggestion and asked for a breather. She hit him with a look that could kill, sultry and loaded, and made it clear she wanted more, hunger glowing in her eyes. Early the next morning, Shen Yuan returned to the dorm, and he climbed out of bed feeling recharged, realizing the system even issued cash back on loan repayments, since he'd calculated all his loans and credit card debt hit 52,000 and settled on clearing those first. Shen Yuan checked the balance in his account, recalling Li Yuhong's 100,000 from back when his family collapsed, and all those fair-weather friends vanished, while Li Yuhong covered for him without dropping a word. Suddenly, a roommate came over and poked around about where Shen Yuan had gone last night, and reminded him to check the group chat, since there was a friend gathering tonight. Shen Yuan opened the group chat, skimmed past a string of folks rambling about how the weekend weather looked decent, and tossing out the idea of going for a walk, then hit a car photo drop that triggered a flood of replies screaming that Li Jianping had sealed the deal. It ran him 280,000, so he must have been rolling in it. And they griped that even 10 years post-grad, pulling something like that probably still couldn't happen, and lobbed in a stray bit about whether the woman at the 4S shop had delivered yet. And he shot the hangout invite again for a chill night,
And he tacked on that the mutt Li Jianping had actually ordered the car and guessed the class president probably leaned on some back door to let him flex and trash the whole thing as a walking cringe fest and blamed the mess on brain-dead idol worship and tossed out a heads up that bailing on the hangout would leave the class fund short 200 yuan. He grumbled that Li Jianping pretending was really adorable and waved them off without joining, claiming he wasn't going. But before he could finish, a message arrived, inviting him to come over for a meal tonight and relax a little. Suddenly, the system chimed in with a notification perfect life mission. It was not just about the opposite sex's favor, but also a career foundation and limited time mission. The host would receive 1 million yuan dedicated to investment within 1 week and invest all 1 million as the mission reward. Any income earned from business activities would be doubled. Shen Yuan reviewed the mission and gleamed inwardly that this time it was a career-related mission, so it was right on time as he had just realized he needed a reasonable source of income for all the money in his account, and Li Yuhong's acoustic bar was under renovation, so he figured he could invest in his bar. Shen Yuan stared at his phone. Li Yuhong's message sat before him, and he messaged back that he should send the location and declared tonight Daddy would show them some fun. At the Nanjing VIP room, Dragon, a young master lounging on the couch, scoffed with a dismissive look, wondering aloud who Li Yuhong was still waiting for as he felt he was about to starve. Xi Haiji, sitting on the side, observed that all the important brothers were already present, while Zhao Zhengang sprawled out there, added that important people wouldn't be late. Li Yuhong, holding a glass of wine, remarked affably that there was no rush and pointed out that fruits and snacks were already on the table so they could snack a bit, as Shen Yuan would be arriving soon, while Lin Guangyao, upon hearing this, jumped up and muttered that Shen Yuan's family had gone bankrupt, and he was not in their circle anymore. He questioned why he was being invited. Li Yuhong reasoned that he was the one paying tonight, and no one else had to, so there was no point in complaining as Shen Yuan was his childhood friend. So he didn't belong with those guys. Lin Guangyao muttered that if Li Yuhong said they would wait, then they would wait, while the girl next to him groaned that he was such a pain, wouldn't be her boyfriend, yet always touched her, while Lin Guangyao then turned to Xie Haiji, bringing up whether his girlfriend was coming tonight. Xie Haiji replied with a wide grin that she was on her way, but there was traffic, and she'd probably take another 10 minutes or so. Lin Guangyao sneered inwardly, believing that Xie Haiji's family always relied on his own, so he mused that without his support he wouldn't even qualify to attend such gatherings. So he wondered how the guy managed to land such a hot girlfriend, especially one in a short, tight skirt and white shirt, as no guy could resist that kind of allure. But anyway, they weren't married yet, so he speculated he might still have a shot. Shen Yuan finally arrived as he opened the door with a bright smile and apologized for the wait, and Li Yuhong, seeing him enter, inquired gently why he was so late. Shen Yuan explained honestly that traffic had been the reason, and he grumbled that the driver had taken the long route through the worst traffic jams. So Li Yuhong lightly punched his shoulder, laughing that some drivers had no morals, and urged him to file a complaint. Lin Guangyao mocked him in thought, noting how everyone there had driven their fancy cars. But Shen Yuan had to take a taxi, so no wonder he got stuck in traffic, and he sneered that Shen Yuan was lucky the rest had their own rides, while he had to call a cab. Suddenly, a beautiful yet recognizable face appeared and rushed to apologize for running late, thanks to rush hour traffic. Xi Haiji, face flushed, got up and introduced her as Chen Na, his girlfriend who worked at a 4S dealership, and he reminded everyone to contact her if they ever needed a car, soaking in a wave of pride from knowing that even if he didn't stack up financially, his girlfriend looked way better. Chen Na caught sight of Shen Yuan and froze briefly, recognizing him as yesterday's customer, who hadn't greeted her. So she went with the easier route of pretending they'd never met. With that in mind, she moved straight to Xie Haiji, her face stiff but still carrying some charm. 40 minutes later, Li Yuhong rose, his cheeks pink from alcohol, and took a moment to explain that the bar he was opening mattered deeply to him. So, since the people here were his tightest circle, he figured he'd see if anyone wanted in on the chance to earn big. And with a capital estimate of about 2.4 million, he planned to cover 30%, roughly 700,000, as he laid it out with a faint awkwardness. He waited to hear reactions. The girl beside Lin Guangyao simply watched, while he quickly tallied that Li's family pulled in tens of millions annually, so if he needed help raising just 700,000, then he probably messed up before and got cut off.
Haiji swirled his drink and weighed that he couldn't swing it, needing 2 full years of savings to scrape together that much, while Zhao Zhenggang mulled over how eating out was one thing, but getting roped into funding something wasn't Li Yuhong's usual move. The self-important guests kept quiet, each silently agreeing that whoever broke the silence first would be the clown. Li Yuhong's expression soured as he stewed over how they always welcomed his dinners and never hesitated to borrow. Yet now that he was looking for a bit of backing, they were playing dead, and while he got that Shen Yuan was strapped, the others had no excuse. He eventually snapped, throwing out a cold remark about how no one had anything to say now that they were stuffed. Lin Guangyao eventually answered by noting that he didn't believe things were dire enough to warrant investment, since if it was just a matter of cash flow, they could each contribute a few thousand to help get it started, and he could pay them back with future profits. Zi Haiji chimed in that it made more sense anyway, since jumping in midway wouldn't really justify a proper share, so he reassured it'd be safer that way to avoid potential losses. While Zhao Zhenggang recalled that everyone already knew what Li Yuhang's investment instincts looked like after that wreck of a hot pot place. And now the guy wanted to open a bar, which pretty much sounded like tossing money into the ocean. The ones off to the side threw sharp glances his way, figuring that if he really needed funds, he could borrow quietly, so dragging them into it felt off, while the others muttered mentally that even with family wealth, sometimes that still wasn't enough. Li Yuhang stayed seated, drained from realizing that what he'd hoped would be a united move to build something had turned into just another plea for cash, and he felt like he'd misread everyone, especially Lin Guangyao, who kept twisting a clear investment pitch into talk of lending. He set his glass down and remarked bitterly that they could revisit the loan talk later, and if no one felt interested, then whatever. Once he said that, Lin Guangyao lifted his own glass quickly and declared that this was more the vibe, since trying to loop them into some plan wasn't fun anyway, and they should just enjoy the night. Shen Yuan stayed quiet, reflecting on how the same group had disappeared when he went broke, so he couldn't figure out why Li Yuhang still believed they'd be any different, eventually deciding that they were all just clinging to their families, and Li Yuhang finally voiced his disappointment, telling them to keep partying without him, since he was heading out. But before he could leave, Shen Yuan unexpectedly volunteered to cover the 700,000. Everything went still as Li Yuhang turned, stunned. Lin Guangyao broke into laughter and mocked him for playing around, reminding everyone that they all knew what he was, and another guy echoed that with a remark about empty words being useless. Zhao Zhenggang clapped his shoulder and urged him to splash water on his face in the bathroom, pointing out that Li Yuhang wasn't really up for games. Zi Haiji threw in a warning, calling him his junior and stressing that lessons from experience meant knowing where to stop, adding that this wasn't just about overstepping, it was about making a fool of himself. Lin Guangyao sneered and threw shade at Shen Yuan, poking at how he even ended up there and tossing in a jab about covering his taxi fare. Chen Na, catching the mockery, ran through her confusion, figuring Shen Yuan planned to invest 30% equity, so she couldn't get why they acted like he was bluffing, especially after watching him drive off in a 600,000 car just yesterday. Someone throwing down that kind of cash, she figured, wouldn't blink at dropping 700,000, so she dipped her head and stalled, stuck between wanting to help and worrying she might mess things up worse if an outsider like her suddenly jumped in, spinning through her options without landing on one. Shen Yuan, chill as ever, let Li Yuhang know he'd already wired the 700,000 and told him to check. Li Yuhang glanced at the number on his screen and nearly choked on the shock. The display lit up with a message confirming the 700,000 hit his account. Lin Guangyao, getting curious, leaned over and tossed a question at Li Yuhang, who froze up and couldn't form a sentence, just held out the phone for him to see. Lin Guangyao stared at the ridiculous number and blinked, trying to figure out why Shen Yuan's transfer packed that many zeros, counting silently until the 700,000 landed in his brain. Chen Na registered the shift too and turned towards Shen Yuan, finally recognizing the entire mood had flipped. Another friend, catching their startled shift, brought up the message, and Lin Guangyao stiffened while replying that something had happened at home and he couldn't keep drinking, tossing out a vague offer to meet again. Zi Haiji got up after seeing this and raised the issue, but Lin Guangyao shot back, brushing him off and claiming he needed to leave too, mentioning that his aunt and uncle were looking for him. Zi Haiji responded with uncertainty, pointing out they hadn't contacted him. Lin Guangyao gave Shen Yuan a resentful look and inwardly slammed his cousin for being clueless, ditching the urge to confront him and zeroing in on Shen Yuan instead, annoyed that someone with that much money had to pretend, and now had stolen the attention, which burned even more. Zhao Zhenggang moved over to Li Yuhang, brought up the message, and asked to check it. After reading, he walked out immediately, dropping a brief note about a family matter and needing to leave. The rest picked up fast and stood too, repeating the excuse and tossing out plans to hang out another day. Zi Haiji turned, puzzled, and pushed for answers, and Chen Na beside him nudged him to go too. Zi Haiji followed, still not getting it, and questioned how she knew they'd all seen a transfer message when she hadn't looked, and she revealed Shen Yuan had ordered a McLaren from her yesterday and paid in full. Zi Haiji reeled, grabbed her hand, and pushed for clarity, so Chen Na answered coolly, challenging the idea she'd lie, and adding that she still had the car contract on her. Put off by the tone, he barked back, saying he wasn't blaming her, but arguing she should have let him know when she realized the guy had money, accusing her of handling things poorly and warning her to be sharper next time. Chen Na yanked her hand away with scorn, snapped that there wouldn't be a next time, called their meeting a mistake, and ordered him not to reach out again. Back inside the VIP room, Li Yuhang sat down, slung an arm over his shoulder, and muttered that if he'd known about the money, he wouldn't have bothered organizing this, calling it a waste. And Shen Yuan filled a glass, stating that at least he now knew none of them were dependable, useful only for fun, not for real plans. Shen Yuan turned, smiled, and told him to explain the quiet bar idea, adding that even as a minor shareholder, he had to stay involved, and Li Yuhang grinned and agreed to start outlining the concept. Over the next half hour, they covered decoration ideas and business setup during a loose brainstorm, and Li Yuhang rubbed his temples and blurted that he really was impressive, said college hadn't been a total waste, and praised his business instinct, while Shen Yuan stretched, owned his talent too, but admitted he didn't have time to run the bar daily, saying it'd be even tougher for him. So he pushed to find a place near campus, and Li Yuhang nodded right away, repeating that he'd do it. An hour later, a message from Chen Na landed, letting Shen Yuan know the car he ordered was arriving soon so he could drop by Friday to settle the balance, and Shen Yuan seemed to get an idea and told her no rush, then asked if she was free tomorrow night since he had detailed questions and wanted to speak face-to-face. Chen Na, seeing this, realized he responded. Meanwhile, Shen Yuan smiled faintly, tagging Fang Minwei in his mind as a cash cow. So even if the amounts were limited, he planned to spread his net wide to squeeze the sugar daddy model dry, figuring with her looks and body, spending on her didn't count as wasted effort. And with that in mind, he sent the meetup details for the next day. Tea restaurant, 4th floor, Guojin Shopping Center. The next day, Chen Na showed up early as arranged. Perched by the window with her chin in her hand, she reflected that Shen Yuan hadn't shown yet, and wondered if she got there too early. Just then, Zheng Xianyong, the 4S store's general manager, stepped inside and spotted her, recognizing Chen Na and clocking her uniform, and he mused to himself that he'd never gotten a chance to hit on her at work, and now might finally get one. He turned to his companions and told them to handle lunch on their own, explaining he had business to deal with, so the people with him instantly picked up the cue and replied that he should go ahead while they headed off. As they walked away, they debated whether Chen Na would entertain his pursuit, but the other pushed back, insisting Chen Na didn't give off that vibe. The first challenged that claim, wondering why a girl would show up at a place like this alone otherwise. So the other pressed him to clarify. Maybe Chen Na had engineered a run-in, deliberately placing herself where Zheng Xianyong would notice her. The first scoffed at the idea, saying Chen Na usually acted too proper for that. But right then, Xie Haiji caught the tail end and cut in, questioning who she was supposedly there for. Zhang Jinyang came over to her table and commented on running into her, asking whether she was alone and if he could sit with her. Chen Na answered plainly that she was waiting for a friend and couldn't. Meanwhile, Zheng Xianyong, misreading everything with baseless confidence, convinced himself she was teasing him on purpose. He placed his hand on the table and insisted that as her boss, he didn't need to care whether she had company. They could still eat together. Chen Na showed unease and requested that he keep things appropriate, reminding him of his family and what kind of behavior he should avoid. He shamelessly pulled out a chair and brushed her off, claiming divorce could solve any problems. At the same time, Zi Haijia tore through the building looking for Chen Na, eaten up with jealousy, convinced she had traded him out for someone else, and insulted by the idea, thinking he earned nearly $500,000 annually and owned a car that cost more than 300 grand, wondering what he lacked. He stormed up to the 4th floor and blew up at what he saw, stunned as he blurted out that he'd lost to some pig. Ji Haiji barged in, jabbed a finger at Zheng Xianyong, and hurled accusations about a secret fling. Chen Na, clearly confused, asked what he meant, and Zheng Xianyong, irritated, demanded to know who he was. Ji Haiji didn't answer, just punched Zheng Xianyong and snapped bitterly that the question should have gone the other way. Zheng Xianyong grabbed his collar and barked at him, demanding to know how he dared to throw a punch. Shen Yuan walked into the room and froze at the scene, running through the logic that with Ji Haiji in the picture something must have gone down, wondering whether they'd been caught or if the fat man was taking the fall, because otherwise he'd be the one sprawled out. Noticing Chen Na sidestepping the chaos, Shen Yuan quickly reached for her and drew her away. He advised her not to stress, telling her to come with him and forget the others. After a while, they stood outside as Chen Na drove and started explaining that she and Zia Haiji had only been a thing for 2 weeks, and she'd realized after a single meal just how bad his personality was, thankfully cutting things off that same night. And Shen Yuan nodded, agreeing that it was better to discover those things early, and reassured her that it was all behind her now, and nothing to dwell on. Chen Na looked uneasy and clarified that it wasn't over because Zheng Xianyong, the man who got punched, was her boss, and since he got hit for no reason, she worried how he might retaliate later. So Shen Yuan proposed that any boss like that wasn't worth sticking around for, and told her to consider quitting. She lowered her eyes and explained that switching jobs wasn't easy, and changing stores meant starting from scratch, with all the clients she'd built up getting tossed. They passed a flower shop by the roadside. Chen Na stared blankly out the window and shared that selling got draining over time and she dreamed of changing tracks, maybe running a cafe. So if she was in a good mood, she could welcome business, and if she wasn't, she could shut the place down, thinking how ideal that life would be, but opening a cafe cost at least 300 grand, and she had no clue how long saving that much would take. Shen Yuan, clearly intrigued, asked whether she truly wanted to run a cafe, and told her that even without the full amount, it didn't matter, wondering aloud what she would do if someone offered to back her, remembering he still had 300,000 earmarked for investments, aside from what he'd already given Li Yuhang. Chen Na didn't take it seriously and laughed, adding that if that were the case, she'd quit immediately and work for him without second thoughts. Shen Yuan stated firmly that she should quit tomorrow, and he would put up the 300,000 to start a cafe, and from then on, she could work for him. Chen Na's hand, mid-slap on his thigh, froze. The number above Chen Na's head shot up to 64, and she gasped in surprise, her chest rising slightly. Shen Yuan, on the other hand, lit up, admitting to himself that he had been afraid of failing to gain her favor up until now. So he celebrated quietly, convinced a walking fortune had just arrived. Chen Na froze, trying to process whether Shen Yuan had just messed with her. Shen Yuan beamed, confirmed his seriousness, then challenged her over the hesitation, wondering aloud if she wasn't up for working under him since the cafe would pay her 12,000 yuan monthly plus commission. And if they stayed open 3 months straight, she'd get a 200K car, which she needed anyway because hers had clearly aged out. Chen Na's eyes brightened, running the numbers in her head and struggling to believe the part where she'd have no pressure and could earn a new car in 3 months, easily pushing her yearly income past 300K. Then a memory clicked into place and suspicion crept in. Wondering if Shen Yuan had plans to trap her into becoming his mistress, Chen Na pictured the girl he'd brought along the last time he bought a car, and remarked that he didn't owe her anything, weighing the offer against the reality that no matter how tempting it sounded, she refused to end up a pampered bird in a gilded cage, especially not as someone's mistress. Shen Yuan crossed his arms and waved it off, explaining that she was reading too much into it since he just planned to start a cafe chain, and this would be the pilot shop, so their roles were strictly boss and employee. Chen Na turned her head aside and, with clear hesitation, asked for some time to think it through. Then, a message popped up from Fang Minhui, asking whether he had plans that evening and suggesting they grab some cold drinks. Shen Yuan glanced at it, fixating on the drinks part, while silently griping about how high-maintenance Fang Minhui could be. He shot back a reply, saying drinks were fine, but they should ease up on how often, then turned to Chen Na and said he had errands to handle, told her to think it over carefully, and left her with a reminder to get back to him soon. Afterward, Shen Yuan made his way straight to the Grand Magnate Hotel, entered room 808, and shut the door behind him. Fang Minhui, who had clearly waited for ages, dashed into his arms and clung tightly, gushing about how much she missed him. And just as he began reacting, she suddenly interrupted, her tone edged with doubt. She noted that he reeked of another woman's perfume. Shen Yuan flinched, sniffed himself with visible confusion, and internally guessed that it probably came from Chen Na's car. Fang Minhui shoved him away, seething, and accused him of messing around with someone else behind her back. Shen Yuan quickly pulled her in again and, with a hushed tone, reassured her that he was only with her, explaining that he'd gone to a 4S dealership to sort out car documents and ended up carrying the scent from the perfume-heavy female staff. Fang Minhui cooled down under his coaxing, eventually relented, then warned him that if he planned to mess with others again, he needed to let her know in advance and steer clear of that specific female worker. Then checked that he understood, which he dismissed with a laugh and agreed to. He chuckled to himself, rationalizing that this wasn't cheating anyway since the system's goal involved spending money on women and racking up rebates, so sticking with one wasn't even an option. She turned around to leave, tossing a flirt over her shoulder about taking a shower. But Shen Yuan caught her arm and shot back something teasing. She responded in a low purr that showering wouldn't work while still dressed. Moments later, her clothes were nowhere in sight. Shen Yuan, leaning in close, muttered something crude about how he preferred her unwashed. Fang Minhui, cheeks reddened, perched on the bed and murmured that she liked his scent too. Shen Yuan yanked off his clothes in one swift move, flung them away, launched himself onto the bed, and buried himself in her neck as he declared that she'd completely set him ablaze. They collided once again. As things escalated, she spiraled into euphoria and mumbled how much she adored him. 2 hours passed, and just when it seemed finished, Fang Minhui whispered that she wasn't done yet, prompting Shen Yuan to groan nervously and ask for a break to clean up, since he felt soaked and sticky, shuffling toward the bathroom on unsteady legs while thinking that her stamina put even Zhou Wanting to shame. Because while she had fun, he was barely holding together. He glanced at the glowing 90 above her head and found himself stunned that her favorability had jumped that high already, especially considering it only reached 86 in a single night last time and had now climbed again after just 2 rounds. Suddenly, the system threw out a notification after picking up that the host had someone of the opposite sex with favorability over 90, marking the mission as complete and delivering a reward pack stacked with a lottery ticket worth $1 million, a 1 million consumption card, and 1 ruthless skill ability card. Shen Yuan froze, eyes flying wide as the number hit him, internally marveling at the million since even winning a lottery usually didn't cough up that much. Finding the reward pretty handy for explaining away cash flow and wiping out debts back home as his gaze skimmed to the part about a ruthless skill ability card, puzzling over what that meant before it clicked that this counted too, with the possibility of future domination dropping straight into his lap. Shen Yuan glanced at Fang Minhui lying there and figured the tables had turned since now he'd be the one calling the shots. With no hesitation, Shen Yuan tapped on the ability card. Instantly, his body shook off every trace of exhaustion and awe washed over him, registering how his lower half buzzed with power and realizing that hitting 90 favorability came with a top-tier bonus. Shen Yuan broke it down in his head, figuring the system's reward logic nailed utility and precision. But catching that 90 was a steep bar, figuring that while Li Xiao already clocked in over 60, raising it to match Fang Minhui's would drag on and grind hard. Even the long-legged Chen Na in those black stockings had hit over 60, so in that moment, he lined up his next move, figuring it had to go one step at a time since who knew when another 90 would pop up, pushing all that aside to dive straight into testing what system Daddy just gave him. A few minutes later, he marched out with heavy steps and lightly called out to Fang Minhui, who blinked at him and checked if something was wrong or if he wasn't showering anymore. Shen Yuan caught her hand and tossed out that he had changed his mind. He turned around and she shifted slightly as he mentioned it should go like this. He slowly took her hand and got started. The sensation slammed into Fang Minhui and she jerked back, gasping over how it felt completely different this time. Elsewhere, Chen Na stretched out on her couch, chatting into her phone with visible excitement, sharing with Xian that some male student just offered her $300,000 to start a store and promised her a $200,000 car after 3 months of work, wondering out loud if he was trying to keep her despite already having a girlfriend. Xian cut her off, immediately tossing out if she was getting played. Chen Na shot that down without blinking, tossing back that it was impossible since she had met the guy a couple times already, and he even bought a car from her not long ago. So Qian pressed again about his age, recalling most of her customers tended to be middle-aged men. Chen Na said he was only 21, which made Xian pause and ask if this young guy was actually driving a luxury car and whether he looked good. Chen Na sat up, cheeks flushing, and muttered that he was kind of handsome. So Qian ran the numbers again, pointing out that if this male student was young, rich, good-looking, willing to drop 300,000 on her business and hand over a 200,000 ride, then everything looked green. Chen Na wandered to the window and quietly mumbled that she was 5 or 6 years older than him, so Qian raised an eyebrow and circled back with the old saying about women being worth gold and silver if they're older by 3 years, rounding up to 2 bars of gold in this case. Chen Na awkwardly added that he had a girlfriend. Qian shrugged that girlfriends didn't equal wives, and lobbed the question back if she was being dense, spelling it out that with everything lined up like this, even a married guy would be fair game, since she had every shot to just take him. Chen Na nearly dropped her phone and squeaked over what her friend was even suggesting. Qian brushed it off with a laugh and teased that if she couldn't handle the heat, she should just hand over that little sugar daddy and let her take the wheel. But Chen Na blanked out again, trying to remember if Qian didn't already have a boyfriend. So Qian fired back with full sincerity that sugar daddies like that made boyfriends optional, and if one came knocking, she'd swap without hesitation, though Chen Na insisted she was just joking around. Qian wrapped up with a quick note that her boyfriend was back, promising to gossip later, and Chen Na hung up. Still reeling, she stared out at the nightlights, but the only thing filling her vision was Shen Yuan's face as she kept circling back to him in her head. Meanwhile, back with Shen Yuan, 40 minutes vanished while Fang Minhui panted and sprawled across the bed, totally wiped out, and mentioned that time felt off somehow. So he lazily leaned up and wondered how it had gotten stronger. Fang Minhui mumbled shyly, dragging the blanket over half her face, super bashful as she pointed out they had already gone at it twice in that stretch. Shen Yuan murmured into her ear whether she enjoyed it and if she felt like going another round. Fang Minhui sat up, flustered, checking if he still had the energy. So Shen Yuan rumbled and reminded her how she learned to dance on top, tossing out the idea that she'd take control this time. Fang Minhui flushed and mumbled that she could ride him but didn't know the moves. Shen Yuan smiled gently and pulled her close, noting that she'd figure it out since real-world experience was the best teacher, so Fang Minhui just quietly murmured in agreement. Shen Yuan pecked her cheek, and she instantly flushed, calling him a bad boy. For the rest of the night, Fang Minhui climbed on and took charge of round 3. The next day, after Fang Minhui left for school, Shen Yuan lounged across the bed, all cozy since no morning classes meant a rare chance to sleep in. But out of nowhere, he sprang up holding a piece of paper and his phone, freaking out over whether he had just hit it big with that system lottery ticket. He tried to steady his breathing as he checked every number, muttering that he nailed them all, and then hollered that he just won 6.8 million. He leapt off the bed and flung the blankets upward, shouting that he had really won 6.8 million, and had to tell his parents because they'd been stuck in poverty for too long after the company collapsed. A little later, Shen Yuan rushed back home and hollered that he was home. His mom, hands planted on her hips, acknowledged him, but reminded him not to yell and wake the neighbors, while he blurted out where his dad was and called for him to hurry, insisting he had urgent news. Old Shen appeared with a suspicious look, probing what couldn't wait, and if trouble had found him again. But Shen Yuan pulled up a chair for his father, grinning wide, and asked what he was on about, since this was good news, and told them both to sit down first. Once they were all settled, he held up the lottery ticket and declared they were now sitting on 6.8 million. His mom froze and questioned whether school pressure had finally snapped something in him, while old Shen stepped in and reassured him to stay focused on his studies, promising they'd handle the debts, and warned him not to get carried away by weird fantasies. Shen Yuan shoved both the ticket and his phone in front of his dad, telling him to check properly before saying another word. Old Shen mumbled quickly and scanned every red number on the ticket and the phone, eyes lighting up as he stared hard and shouted to his wife that the win was real. His mom gasped and double-checked, asking if it could be true, and old Shen, bursting with joy, confirmed the full 6.8 million. Shen Yuan tacked on that even with 20% going to taxes, they'd still pocket over 5 million. And with that, not only could they wipe out every debt, they could also seriously upgrade the family's entire lifestyle. So his mom burst out joyfully that his name was definitely going into the family records, and lunch was off because they were celebrating the win outside. Shen Yuan rubbed the back of his head, looking slightly shy, and mentioned that with just a year left before graduating, he wanted to start a business to get some real experience. Old Shin beamed and remarked that running a business wasn't easy these days, but having ambition was great, so he cheered him on, adding that since the money was his, he ought to spend it how he liked. though he personally thought he and his wife should hold on to some just in case things didn't work out. Shen Yuan sheepishly responded that he'd only keep 1 million, and the rest would go to them to handle however they wanted. Old Shen chuckled and nodded along, and his mom chimed in that he should go for it since both of them had his back. Elsewhere, Zheng Xianyong's face scrunched as he pointed to his bruised cheek after the previous day's brawl, claiming she already understood why he had summoned her and told her to take a good look, since this mess was clearly her boyfriend's masterpiece. Chen Na snapped back that she had already dumped him, and they no longer shared any connection, so if he wanted compensation, he could take it up with him. Zheng Xianyong brushed that off and claimed it didn't work like that since debts needed to hit the right target. That implied he wouldn't have gotten thrashed for no reason if not for her, while quietly checking her out and figuring he could definitely land her with this as leverage. Chen Na didn't flinch, reminding him that his scuffle had nothing to do with her, and she had already mentioned she had other plans, while he was the one who forced himself into that seat. Zheng Xianyong's face darkened as he cut her off, claiming enough with the excuses, since she had abandoned her post without approval the afternoon before, leaving no one to handle guests at the front, so her punishment was a full month suspended from reception duties, and she'd better get her act together before coming back to him. Feeling wrongly accused, Chen Na pushed back all the way, insisting she had submitted her leave request the day prior. Hearing that, Zheng Xianyong laughed dryly and mocked her, asking based on what authority, then snidely added this must be her first brush with real life, since it all came down to him being the general manager, which meant his word ruled everything in the store. The blatant capitalist nonsense made her furious, but she couldn't counter it. Zheng Xianyong, now full of himself, guessed cutting her off from reception was the same as cutting her commissions, and figured with only base pay, she'd get stuck with a measly 1,200 yuan, not even enough to cover rent. Chen Na finally saw through him, turned her back decisively, and left him with a cold jab that he only strutted around like some big shot because of a lame general manager title. But this was just a job, and worst case, she'd walk away. That made Zheng Xianyong panic, and he leapt up, blurting out a plea not to be rash, urging her to think twice before quitting. Chen Na did think, but not about him, as she reflected on Shen Yuan, who, despite his youthful look, clearly wasn't normal, and he got things done without delay, so never mind what he aimed to do. Even just working part-time for him looked like a way out. This time, her resolve solidified, as she shot back firmly that there was nothing more to think about. Not doing it meant exactly that. Half an hour later, Shen Yuan's message popped up, and Chen Na followed up to check if his offer from the day before still stood. So he responded quickly with congratulations for escaping misery and stepping onto a brighter road, encouraging her to browse some shops, and if she spotted a good one, they'd lock it in. Shen Yuan strolled along the street, saw the reply, and figured this was perfect, since the leftover 300,000 from the investment job didn't need a new target anymore. He also arrived at his destination, and the moment he walked in, he greeted Li Xiao politely to announce his arrival. Li Xiao was still crouched beside several boxes, and turned her head to explain that she was moving her office. But the load was too much, and since she'd wanted to call the class monitor who ended up busy, she had to take leave to handle it herself. Shen Yuan glanced up at the shelf and assured her it was fine since he didn't have class that morning, and his family didn't need him, then asked if everything had to be moved. Li Xiao wiped her forehead and admitted with a sheepish grin that she could manage the books and papers. But the table and filing cabinet were too bulky. She headed toward one cabinet while explaining that it was out of her reach and suggested removing all the books from the shelf first to prevent them from falling during the move. Short on height, she had to stretch onto her toes. Then, a firm hand showed up behind her to assist. Shen Yuan reached up and grabbed the stack of documents. Their proximity brought her backside into contact with Shen Yuan's little bird. That soft bump and shift made Li Xiao flush as her heartbeat raced. The moment triggered a memory of that last close call, and she figured this one topped it in closeness. That confirmed it for her. Shen Yuan definitely had designs on her. Li Xiao's cheeks flushed, and she asked in a quiet mumble whether the task had been handled. Shen Yuan lifted the stack of papers with zero hesitation and confirmed with a casual grin that it was already done. Out of nowhere, a chipper voice floated in from the hallway, announcing their arrival to help the teacher. The group stepped in, took one look around, and immediately ran mental diagnostics on why Li Xiao looked so red in the face. Shen Yuan motioned them over without missing a beat, and tossed out instructions to move the filing cabinet into the next room, and the two got to work fast, sleeves up and all business.
Li Xiao drifted to a corner, fingers running through her hair with slow precision, silently grateful those students had shown up seconds too late, or they would have seen everything, and that would have been peak humiliation as she noted how Shen Yuan had gotten way too bold, crossing lines that maybe made sense at home but not in the middle of the office. She pressed a hand to her chest, face still warm, admitting with a whisper of denial that something about it had made her feel a little electric, and immediately countered herself with a strict reminder that Shen Yuan was her student and the whole thing was completely unacceptable. Meanwhile, Shen Yuan glanced over, clocked her expression, and quietly puzzled over why her favorability rating had jumped to 71, figuring that the tiny contact just now must have nudged the needle. He rubbed his chin with a sly smile, mentally reviewing the incident and deciding it wasn't his fault for being too long, but rather hers for having a butt too large to accommodate spacing, and mused that if it had been a skinnier girl, the situation wouldn't have even happened, which led him to consider whether he should swing by her place more often to grow their connection. Fast forward to Saturday, parked 800 meters south of the school gate in a bubblegum pink cafe with full aesthetic overload. Inside, a cluster of stylish girls buzzed with energy as they tossed around. Whether it was true that Li Junping had dropped 280,000 in one go for that car, marveling that he was rolling in a BBA even before graduating, and had already climbed past 99.99% of his peers. Li Junping sat back, oozing smugness while internally trashing Feng Minhui for faking innocence and brushing him off, convinced that with his setup, women were practically throwing themselves at him just for the chance. And he broke into a hearty laugh, shaking his head over how some people still had the nerve to mock a BBA. One girl blinked hard and called him out for complaining, reminding him his family had money for days, and another quickly backed her up, adding that some folks couldn't afford that ride even if they hustled for half a decade straight. Riding high, Li Junping glanced out the window and got hit with a full freeze-frame moment, face heating as he accidentally sprayed tea from his mouth. In his mind, he nearly barked at himself for never realizing how gorgeous the girl out there was, watching Chen Na lounge outside like a magazine shoot come to life, and kept locking eyes on her legs, instantly swearing off a decade of his life just for the chance, wondering what kind of god-tier guy could land someone that perfect. Then a girl near the window lowered her gaze to the street and blurted about the driverless car being ridiculously high-end, tossing out curiosity about what model it even was. Li Junping peeked over and coolly dropped the answer that it was a top-tier M9. At that exact moment, Shen Yuan stepped out next to the vehicle, triggering a collective blink from the whole group. One girl leaned over the table, staring down and nudging the others with a quiet nudge, checking if that really was Shen Yuan, while Li Junping froze in a daze, processing how weird it felt, since he remembered Shen Yuan's family had gone completely bankrupt. And now, here he was, rolling in luxury. From the sidewalk, Chen Na spotted him, raised a hand and gave a relaxed wave, calling him over loud enough to make Li Junping whip his head in that direction just to make sure. He sprang up, brain catching up to the obvious, registering that the flawless girl was waiting for Shen Yuan. Chen Na flashed a soft smile and threw in a comment about the car being smooth to drive, mentioning that the boss had just messaged and would arrive soon. Shen Yuan settled into the seat, lifted his cup, and responded with a low-effort note that it handled pretty well. A girl leaned toward Li Junping and murmured that it looked like something serious was brewing between those two, while Li Junping clenched his jaw and practically steamed with jealousy, watching Shen Yuan rebound from his last relationship with a senior straight into something with a bombshell from outside school. At that moment, a slender hand tapped their table. A beautiful woman strolled over and greeted Chen Na, explaining her delay with a quick mention of school pickup duty and introducing herself as the cafe owner, Lin Yucheng. Shen Yuan got up and greeted her with a handshake, while she gave him a polite smile and complimented how young he looked, and he casually brushed it off by mentioning they were all about the same age, in their early 20s, then motioned for Miss Lin to sit and chat. Lin Yucheng settled in with an easy composure and skipped the pleasantries, sharing that her cafe was doing all right and mostly served students from the nearby school, but her family had too much on their plate and she couldn't juggle everything anymore. So the shop had to go, and the transfer fee was 300,000. Shen Yuan listened with a smile, doing quick math in his head since he had 300,000 for investment. But after handing over the fee, he still needed to keep 50,000 to kickstart operations and cover Chen Na's first month's salary. So he kept smiling and suggested they close at 250,000, promising not to bargain further. Lin Yuchang weighed it out, figuring his price landed a bit under her expected 270,000. But if she passed now, she might not find another buyer willing to act so fast. So she gave it some thought and asked if they could sign the contract and complete the payment that same day. Shen Yuan nodded with a grin and confirmed that after the contract was signed, he'd send over 250,000 immediately. Once she got the answer she wanted, Lin Yuchang turned to the staff nearby, Xiao Chu, and let her know that Shen Yuan was the new boss, instructing her to show him around and get him familiar with how things ran. Xiao Chu came over quickly and bowed with practiced courtesy, greeting her new boss. Shen Yuan gestured toward Chen Na and told Xiao Chu to take her around instead, mentioning that he wouldn't be around the shop much, and Chen Na would be in charge of everything here. At the next table, a girl turned to her friend and mentioned she had just heard the whole thing and couldn't believe how a 250,000 deal had wrapped up in minutes. And her friend added that clearly Shen Yuan was buying the shop for the girl beside him. Li Junping's face soured as the words hit him, but he kept quiet because there wasn't anything he could do. Right then, Lin Yuchang's phone rang. She excused herself, apologizing as she stepped outside to take the call. Chen Na leaned toward Shen Yuan and quietly mentioned it looked like Lin Yuchang was Zheng Xianyong's wife, the same guy who'd had a fight with Jie Haiji at the shopping center and ran the 4S store. Shen Yuan's brows lifted in surprise as he noted the coincidence, wondering how a man with such a beautiful wife at home still stooped to using his position to pressure female employees with those unwritten rules, and found it downright vile, something he couldn't tolerate. Chen Na spoke in a low voice, explaining that she still had records of Zheng Xianyong harassing and threatening her, and she planned to use her salary to go public with it, exposing him so people in the car industry could see who he really was. Then hesitated, unsure if Shen Yuan thought she should let Lin Yuchang know, since she genuinely seemed like someone who didn't deserve that kind of pain. Shen Yuan answered steadily that he didn't think that would be a good idea, and Chen Na blinked in surprise, wondering why not. Shen Yuan explained plainly that once the chat logs went public, Zheng Xianyong would immediately know she was behind it. And since the man was in his 40s with a family to support and no job to fall back on, he might retaliate. So Shen Yuan told her to leave it to him and promised he'd make sure Zheng Xianyong went down, without dragging her into it. Chen Na's tense shoulders finally eased, and she thanked Shen Yuan with quiet relief. Shen Yuan took out his phone and let her know he'd already sent 250,000 to Lin Yuchang and transferred 50,000 to her, with 24,000 as her salary for the first 2 months and the rest as working capital to run the shop. Just then, a system notification lit up, registering that the host had exhausted the full 1 million investment fund. The investment task was complete, and the investment level had been upgraded from novice to primary investor, unlocking a serial task and declaring that a perfect life should come with more assets. So 10 million in dedicated investment funds had been granted for expansion, and for Mission 1, all future investment income would triple, with Mission 2 offering a mysterious property upon completion. Shen Yuan read through the notification, blinking at each line with growing surprise as he hadn't expected this bonus from the system. And now the investment multiplier had jumped to 10 times, and with 10 million at his disposal and a mystery property up for grabs, his curiosity was already kicking in. Lin Yuchang came back from the call with a cheerful look and confirmed that she'd received the money and looked forward to a smooth collaboration, mentioning she'd take her leave first but hoped to see him again. Shen Yuan gave her a handshake, cheeks tinged red, as he noted privately how her hand felt soft and boneless without losing that magnetic elegance, the distinct kind that came with being another man's wife. A stray thought crept in that he immediately knew he shouldn't be having. Shen Yuan smiled with an easy calm and confirmed they would definitely meet again. Half an hour later, at a high-end restaurant, Chen Na sat across from him and cautiously brought up whether Shen Yuan came here often, considering how pricey the place was, and Shen Yuan brushed it off, claiming not that often, but today called for it since he was celebrating their smooth cooperation. Chen Na over there was already turning red, and Shen Yuan, in his head, tagged her as a real piece of work, the kind that would have thrown off any so-called upright man. Shen Yuan then finally tossed out the suggestion that Chen Na sit next to him. She gave a soft response and moved over without any fuss, and the moment she settled in, Shen Yuan slid an arm around her waist and nudged her to scoot a little closer, while mentally doing the math that shutting down the cafe had cost 300K plus 12K a month in salary. So now was the time to claw some of that back. Chen Na flushed and reasoned internally that in this world, nothing came free. So maybe he didn't actually plan to make money from the cafe, since Lin Yucheng had warned that breaking even was already a win. The only thing she had to give him was this, as Shen Yuan's arm stayed wrapped gently around her. Chen Na leaned in and quietly reminded him the waiter would be back any second, and warned him not to act out. But Shen Yuan gave a faint smile and tossed back that the food here always took its sweet time. So just like that, Shen Yuan kept holding her, and Chen Na simply sat there, all quiet and flustered. Only 10 minutes later came a knock with the announcement that food was on the way, making Chen Na jolt and alert him someone was coming. They pulled apart right then, and Shen Yuan cheerfully gave the go-ahead to come in. After the dishes landed on the table, Shen Yuan picked up a bite for her and nudged her to try it, claiming it was the restaurant's big hit. Watching him earnestly serve food, Chen Na ran through the thought that Shen Yuan was honestly good-looking, and his only real issue was being kind of a jerk, since even with a gorgeous girl by his side, he still couldn't keep it in his lane. She let out a sigh, her face warming again, and told herself it was pointless now, since she was already stuck on the pirate ship anyway. Time slipped by, and 40 minutes later, they'd cleaned their plates when the cashier read off a total of 2,652 and prompted Shen Yuan to scan. Shen Yuan, mid-scan, figured that even though the meal hit 2,652, the system's triple refund turned that into 5,304 in the pocket. So making money felt about as easy as flipping a palm, while Chen Na was over there calculating that a single meal had just equaled her commission from selling a whole car. And rich people spending 2,000 was like her dropping 20. They strolled the road together until she suddenly mentioned she wanted to swing by the cafe to check in with Xiao Shu, since she was starting work there tomorrow and needed to get up to speed. And Shen Yuan spun back around and reminded her it was already 8:30, and Xiao Chu got off at 9 o'clock, so if she showed up now, she'd just miss her and risk ticking her off, so better to rest up and go in fresh the next day. Chen Na heard that and turned shy again, agreeing softly, then apologized for troubling him and asked to be taken home. And Shen Yuan flashed that sunny grin again and accepted without a blink. When they got there, Chen Na hopped out, smiling and mentioning he'd worked hard today, and after she clocked in tomorrow, she'd report everything to him. And Shen Yuan stepped out too and lightly requested if he could come upstairs for a glass of water, claiming he felt a little thirsty. Chen Na responded hesitantly that it wasn't really convenient, her nerves picking up since this whole thing had moved too fast and what happened back in the private room had already pushed her limit. Shen Yuan rubbed his chin and tossed out a casual question about whether she had another man up there. Chen Na quickly turned around and made it clear there was no way, since she and Zi Haiji had already broken up, and Shen Yuan caught that and smiled, saying there was no need to twist things around. He really just wanted a glass of water. So what exactly wasn't convenient? Chen Na still looked unsure and checked if he really planned to just drink water and leave. So Shen Yuan lit up again and reassured her, of course. But if she wanted to keep him overnight, that worked too. Chen Na stared at him, her face flat out calling nonsense. A moment later, as soon as the door opened, things kicked off. Shen Yuan reached lightly for her waist and braced against the doorway. He gained the upper hand fast, while Chen Na, cheeks flushed, gently pushed him back and reminded him he had only come up for water. But Shen Yuan stayed playful and replied with a grin that he was drinking water, just not the kind she meant. The slide into deeper affection between them was already past stopping. At that same moment downstairs, a black car sat parked out front, and inside, Zi Haiji quietly worked through the idea that Chen Na must have quit her job because of him, so he had to get her forgiveness first, even if they only ended up as normal friends, and maybe then he'd have a shot again. Standing at the foot of the building, Zi Haiji glanced up and noted the lights in her place were off, so probably she wasn't home, and he decided to leave the flowers at her door since roses stood for loving someone forever, and his feelings hadn't changed. And Chen Na was sharp enough to know exactly who left them. But the second he reached her door, he froze up, catching sounds through the thin gap that made his face lock tight as he stumbled over the shock of recognizing Chen Na's voice, unable to process it since she'd insisted nothing was happening with Zheng Xianyong, and yet there she was, completely wrapped up with him. He completely snapped, slamming both fists against the door and shouting for Zheng Xianyong to come out and face him. Shen Yuan, lounging nearby and enjoying himself, caught the noise and figured it had to be Zi Haiji, that fool who'd already been tossed aside, wondering what kind of clown still stuck his nose in after being dumped. quietly questioning whether the guy had any self-control left. Chen Na also caught the ruckus and mentioned hearing something outside, wondering who was knocking. But Shen Yuan, not even pausing, brushed it off and told her she was imagining things, claiming it was probably someone messing around next door. He scooped her up and casually suggested they head to the bedroom. Cradled in his arms, Chen Na muttered that she wasn't really ready and asked him to take it easy. So Shen Yuan answered with a gentle nod and reassured her softly. Xie Haijie's bouquet of roses finally slipped from his fingers and hit the floor. Crushed, Xie Haijie sank to the ground right in front of Chen Na's door, completely certain she'd been taken over entirely and realizing he had lost his chance. So he just sat there and cried quietly, begging them to use protection. An hour later, the rhythm inside Chen Na's room hadn't slowed, her breath coming fast as she panted. That this kind of thing felt nice, but left her drained. Then, without warning, Shen Yuan flipped her over, pulling a startled squeal from her as she asked what he was doing, and he murmured that lying like this would be easier on her. Shen Yuan, half-focused, weighed whether he might accidentally tap into his stellar energy again and figured that despite Chen Na's bold exterior, her conservative streak made her even more appealing to him. After that heated stretch, Shen Yuan finally woke up groggy, taking in a deep breath as the scent of toast and fried eggs drifted in, drawing a lazy smile as he soaked in the aroma. Chen Na was casually making breakfast for both of them while the morning sun spilled through the window, casting a slow golden glow across the room. Shen Yuan stayed put, watching her from where he sat, and quietly reflecting that Chen Na's considerate nature hit different. Nothing like the nights he spent holed up in hotel rooms with Fang Minhui, and this feeling of comfort belonged to a real home, not some passing stop. Right as the thought flickered across his mind, the system's voice chimed in, dropping the reminder that a perfect life needed a real home to support both the user and the girls, before rolling out the mission to buy a house of at least 100 square meters for Chen Na, and listing Reward 1 as a double refund on the home's cost and Reward 2 as a hidden house bonus after the purchase, noting that the refund could stack depending on her favorability level. Shen Yuan registered the coincidence and felt floored, barely wrapping his head around how a simple thought led to such a generous setup from the system. And he instantly committed to the idea, confident the house would be something top tier. His mind drifted to fantasies of a secret house, a massive villa, and endless pool parties, already figuring he'd need to gather more high-quality girls to drive the surprise meter even higher. Right then, Chen Na glanced over at him still on the bed and let him know breakfast would be done in 2 minutes. Shen Yuan stood, wandered out, leaned casually against the wall with arms folded, and mused about what kind of perks might drop if Chen Na's favorability ever hit 90, tossing a lazy smile as he casually asked if breakfast was the only thing on the menu this morning. As Shen Yuan closed in and started grabbing again, Chen Na flushed and pointed out they'd already done it so many times last night, asking if he really hadn't had enough, especially now that it was broad daylight. But Shen Yuan answered with a satisfied grin and told her to keep cooking while he enjoyed his breakfast. The ladle dropped straight from Chen Na's hand onto the floor. Shen Yuan leaned in close to her ear and mentioned that if she didn't have other plans later, they could go house hunting, and he'd gift one to her, which left her completely stunned. Chen Na mulled over the fact that Shen Yuan had already dropped 300,000 to set up her cafe, and now he was ready to buy her a house. So even though Xingcheng wasn't some top-tier city, the price tag for a place still clocked in over $1 million, which made her admit to herself that she'd already handed him everything and left her wondering what he was planning, guessing he must have been riding high from the night before her. Shen Yuan, still wrapped around her, asked what the silence meant and if she didn't want the present, and Chen Na fumbled out that it wasn't about not wanting it, it was just way too sudden and too expensive, tossing in a reminder that his money didn't sprout from tree branches. Shen Yuan barely contained the grin, knowing full well it kind of did since he clocked that his card balance had over 3.5 million ready to go for a house. And with the system's 5 times cashback locked in, the total would spike past 17 million in a blink. He clutched her tighter and murmured that there was no need to be frugal on his behalf, figuring that buying a home for his woman wasn't a big deal, as he told her to pick a place at least 120 square meters or more because there was no way he'd let her settle for less. And Chen Na got so overwhelmed, she teared up and called out to him. Seeing her face wet, Shen Yuan gently wiped the tears and threw in a reminder that they'd made quite a scene the night before. And with paper-thin walls, both sets of neighbors had probably gotten the full audio.
And once that hit, she pouted and tossed the blame right back at him. He gave a small grin and took part of the blame, casually throwing in that her moans had been seriously loud. And Chen Na whipped around, beat red, and called him a jerk. All of a sudden, Chen Na remembered something and got serious, mentioning that 2 of her besties were supposed to swing by the cafe, and she had told them to come at 10 in the morning, so she suggested pushing the house hunt to later. Shen Yuan responded without a hitch, saying buying a house wasn't some veggie run, and that picking the right one and getting the paperwork squared away needed real time. So he suggested they stretch the schedule, and Shen Na gave a nod, stepped out of his arms, and said she'd let them know. She snatched her phone and messaged Qian, saying something had come up and she wouldn't make it to the cafe, offering to shift plans to the evening and asking if that worked. But Qian fired back fast, asking what had happened and dropping that she and Liu Menglu were already there. Sitting in the car, Qian skimmed the message and passed on that Chen Na claimed something had come up and she couldn't show. Liu Menglu frowned and asked what was going on. Qian scanned her phone again and threw out some doubt, suspecting the cafe excuse was bogus and guessing Chen Na was just covering something, figuring no guy would drop 300,000 on a woman that easily. Liu Menglu didn't buy it, shrugging that Chen Na wasn't the type to fake stuff, and suggesting Qian hit her up directly, while silently noting it had been years since she ran into a young, rich guy, and now Chen Na had snagged one first, so she made a mental note that she absolutely had to meet him. Qian glanced at her phone and confirmed she'd ask. Liu Menglu hit the gas and exclaimed when she caught that the guy was taking Chen Na to go house shopping. Their car jerked on the road as Liu Menglu reacted, wondering if that could actually be true. She figured house shopping wasn't like splurging on bags or makeup and pointed out that even a tiny 40 square meter place would set someone back between 500,000 and 600,000 yuan. And now this guy, after less than half a month, was tossing nearly 900,000 her way if the cafe counted too. She figured that even if Chen Na went along with it, a man like that couldn't possibly be loyal to just one woman. And in the game of keeping men satisfied, she was confident she could outmatch her. Liu Menglu then told Qian to ask which development they were heading to and let Chen Na know they'd tag along to help, figuring they had nothing else lined up. And an extra pair of eyes never hurt when picking a house, while thinking to herself that it was better if their own circle reaped some benefits, rather than leaving it to outsiders. Qian didn't waste a second, and said she'd message her now. 40 minutes later, at the Songhu Tiandi sales center, Liu Menglu hopped out of the car and froze, stunned on the spot, privately clocking that even the tiniest place there crossed the 1 million line. And she figured any man handing over a house like that to a side girl must be seriously loaded, quietly wondering when her own payday would come. Qian glanced around and gave a wave, calling out that it had been forever. Chen Na replied quickly, tossing back how much she'd missed her, as Qian walked up, grabbed her hand, and pointed to the man beside her, asking who the handsome guy was and wanting an intro. Chen Na, lit up with joy, walked Shen Yuan over and cheerfully introduced him to her 2 besties, adding that Liu Menglu was a fitness coach and Ho Qian worked sales over at Ferrari.